Hello! I'm Alchemist, the head developer of Get Into Their Heart, and this is Devlog 2. This video will be going over how do you polish a game. As always, you don't need to have watched the previous one or be especially interested in this specific game, though of course it will be using it as an example. This video will be split into chapters, and as you can see here are the few topics that will be covered in this video. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this first topic doesn't necessarily have that good of a place to start off with, but it is a very important step in polish, and that is a second pass / playtesting the game. This was one of the things that caused the development of Get Into Their Heart to drag a very long time. We just didn't have the drive to do a second pass ourselves, and there wasn't anyone specifically on the team whose position was to playtest the game, so we weren't getting any external feedback. And so that caused development to drag because we just didn't have a clear route forward, and that's a very important thing to have. You want clear and actionable things that you can take and directly put into the game, and it's just overall really helpful for motivation. One example of that is the CGs. So in this game specifically, I suppose it's a visual novel term generically, there are what's called CGs. Character graphic, I believe, is the thing. And what those are is basically just like an alternate background. And last time, if you'll remember, I talked about some scaling issues with the background. So essentially what was happening was the backgrounds were a little bit not scaled correctly, so they would appear to take up less of the space than the screen, or they would be a little bit zoomed in. And we just didn't catch that without playtesting, because when you're developing, it's a little bit hard to just go and immediately after adding something and run through the entire game and check to see if anything is broken. It's a very important step, but oftentimes it's neglected. So essentially, these were a little bit too zoomed out, and so it was a simple fix. You just zoom them in, a little bit of transformation. Another example of this is with this. Also a pseudo CG, not necessarily a actual character graphic. It's in the same category, at least, of unique things that are not the default backgrounds and stuff like that. It's probably not the best to put it in the same category, but it was helpful for me, at least, to categorize them together. So this is Gift Bad, a graphic of gum with a phone number on it. It's interesting, it's a nice touch to add it in. That's a lot of what polish is, just adding little nice touches like stuff like that. You can see here that at a certain point you are supposed to hide them, but this line was not here. Actually, we can do a little bit of live tweaking. You don't actually need to have the hide gift bad line there. You can just have hide gift, and that's good enough. Moving on, we have music and sound effects, and in general, other kinds of things that will not just take the route of engaging the eyes of the player. You also want things that will engage the ears of the player, of course. And so what you can do is you can, of course, have music, which you'll probably have music, but it's interesting to note that music effects, stuff like fading in and fading out your music, can be a nice touch to add to your game. So for this, what these two lines are is, if there's a previous song that's playing, it'll fade out that track, and then it'll fade in this track if there's nothing else that is being played. And then down here, we have something that will stop the music. I tried to get this to be, instead of stopping the music, just muting it, but it seemed like that was more hassle than it's worth. A lot of the times, you don't need very complicated things. You can just have simple stuff like this. Just stop music rather than having to mute the mixer that something is on or a channel. We'll get into those two topics later. But here we just stop the music. Here it's paired with a bunch of other effects. Of course, there's a little bit of V-punch, so it's like a screen shake. And also here we're playing another sound effect. So in addition to stopping the music and shaking the screen a little bit, we'll play a sound effect. And of course, that's just like a tray crash, because what's happening in the story here is this character is dropping a tray of coffee and then bam, it's hitting all over your book. But another way that we can use this is right here. For a lot of the scenes in the game has a bunch of like red flags and stuff like that. And oftentimes one of the ways you can make something like a little bit odd or unnerving is to have no music. So for some of these things that are either red flags or more commonly the character having some knowledge that they're not supposed to have, we will have the music stop. And that's just a little nice thing to help emotionally resonate with the feelings that you should be feeling as a player. Maybe you won't, maybe you will. It's just a nice trick to get those to be similar. Moving on, you can also see here that there are some expressions and scene transitions. So as opposed to just having a static sprite, you can have different iterations of the same sprite. So rather than just a dog default, you can have a dog confused. Last time I went over the tags. So what that essentially is this line here. So this is the character of dog. Instead of having each of the sprites be dog confused, all one word, we space them out. And so what that does is it signals to Ren'Py that they're both under the character dog. It will show this sprite and hide this sprite at the same time. It's not going to need you to show this and then additionally hide this. A nice touch is to have transitions. So in Ren'Py, what you can do is you can use the animation transformation language, ATL, that's going to be on the Ren'Py docs, and you can define different transitions. Here we have a very simple one, move center. Essentially what this line is doing is it's showing this character at the left, and then we're going to translate them from the left to the center, or more broadly, move them from wherever they are on the screen to the center. And you can see here that this is the code that happens for that. So it's a transforms. Whenever we ping this, it will ease into this ex-align. So this ex-align is the part that says put it in the middle, and this ease is what's saying just ease into that. There are a bunch of different translations that you can do. You can just do a linear translation, which is straight, or this one is, I believe, a little bit of a sine wave in terms of how fast it's going. Also, while we're up here, let's go over the voice SFX. So, a lot of the times, you can especially hear it in games like Undertale, or rather, that's going to be one of the most popular games that has it, even though that's not necessarily a visual novel. It's just a good example. So what that has is voice SFX. At least that's the name I have for it, but I'm not sure what the proper industry name for it is. What you need to do is, in a Python block, you need to define an event that does something whenever something happens. So this is defining this voice SFX thing, and it looks for an event show done. What it's looking for is just whenever text is scrolling on the screen. And then what it does then is it will queue an SFX file. Here it is default voice, but we can also tie it to one of the characters. So each of the characters have their different unique voice, and that's here. So here's also where we're actually linking it up as a callback. It's going to look for voice SFX up here, and it will plug in the SFX file into that. So replacing this. And then whenever text is scrolling, it will queue up this file. Essentially, what this file holds is a tiny snippet that is supposed to be the character's voice or something. And then whenever their text is happening, it will play and loop that sound effect. And so that's going to have add a little bit more texture to stuff as these things are happening. And of course, when the text is done displaying, then it will stop. One of the things that we do need to do, at least something that I did, is put it in a different channel. So Ren'Py has a few different mixers that it will have different things be playing in. You can easily access the sound and music channels by just playing a sound or playing a music, but the voices channel is a little bit trickier to access. So we're going to need to register a channel that is it's called Voices. I know it's a little bit confusing, but that's just the one that I was easily able to remember, and it'll play it in the voice mixer. And so if you go into the preferences menu, you can set the individual volume for each of music, sound, and voice. So you can change them, and it's not necessarily going to be stuck in the sound mixer, taking up space and potentially cutting off other sound effects. Additionally, one of the things you can do is play a movie. Movie is a little bit of a misnomer. You certainly can use it for movies or something like that, but the way that we use it currently is for an animated background with some music to it. So as you can see here, we have a displayable that is called Death because that's what's happening. A little bit on the nose, but this is all spoilery anyways, so if you're looking into this, you should be prepared to see stuff that's not necessarily going to come up until later in the game. This is quite literally the heart of the game, and you have gotten into it, if you would. So this is going to be a displayable of type movie, and there's a bunch of little things here, little nuances to how it's played, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking a video file, and in this case, it's playing it as a background. This is the scene that happens when you die at the very end of the game, and it's just a little bit of like blood spattering on the background and some of Minty's death noises. Sorry if that was a little bit loud or sudden or anything like that, but you can also see here that there's a little bit of stuff that's commented out. It was a little bit tricky to see which version of playing a movie we wanted. Originally was also a sound effect that was playing and not necessarily just a movie. I believe this sound effect is still in the game files, and you can play it if you want. Plant actually made this, whereas Minty made the cutscene. Moving on, we have something here that is going to be a little bit more complicated, but it's going to be really, really good for making your game stand out. This file is the GUI file. It's essentially I don't really have an analogy for it. It's kind of determining what the skin of the game looks like. And there's a bunch of different things here that will help make your game just the way that you like it to be. In addition, you can change all of these files in the game/GUI folder. That will have a bunch of these different things that are default in RenPy, but you can change them yourself. In addition to the GUI file, there's also the screens file. I tried to mess around with this on the last few days of development because I like to just add a gallery for where all of the stuff that's not necessarily in the game but is still important to the development of the game and comment on all of those things. So I tried to make a gallery, but it was a little bit too time consuming for the last few days of development, which is when I add the gallery just as kind of like a final nice little bit at the end. But regardless, this is where you would do that, where you add something new to the game's screens. So that would be something like the load screen or the preferences screen. I bet we can actually... Yes, we can go in here and find the preferences menu. There's a lot of stuff in here that's going to be really complicated. It's a lot of layering. You're not going to be reinventing the wheel for every single screen that you make, so it's just adding a lot of different elements together to make these screens. But that does mean it's a little bit more complicated to mess with this or make your own screens and things. I'd heavily encourage you to just go onto the documentation or, heaven forbid, look up a tutorial, which I suppose you've already done. I guess you could be watching this for a different reason, but I don't know. You'll also see here that in this file right here, the options file, there's a little bit more than you can tweak. It's not all of the things that are directly going to be seen by the player, but there's a bunch of interesting options, I guess, in here. And so there's stuff like the config name, which will be your title and stuff like that, and this right here, which will, in the bottom bottom right hand or wherever you have it set up to be shows both the title and the version number of the game. I have it set to false because we wanted the title to show up in actual sprite form. I looked and I didn't find a good way of layering another sprite on top of a background, so I just made a new background that had the title logo sprite in it, and so we didn't need to show that information here. Here you can see a lot of other features and options that are specifically for like the menus and stuff. So we have the poem theme in the menu, and these are the transitions that happen when you are entering or exiting the game menu, and there's a bunch of stuff in here. You can read this. All of these comments are in here from the get-go, so whenever you create a blank project, you'll be able to see it. But with that, I believe we're done. Not done polishing the game, because you're going to definitely need to have to do some work on your own, and I'm actually a little bit not finished with polishing the game, because there's a little bit more to doing it. Of course, there's promotional materials. There's not necessarily a good way of visualizing this, but I'll just say you want a logo for your title that's transparent. It's dependent on where you want to put your game, on Steam, probably on itch.io or something else like that, but they'll have some things on where you want to do it. But it's important to think of how to market your game in the sense of like, what do you want the key visuals and aesthetics of the game to be? You want something that embodies your game enough that it can show someone who just looks at the title or the thumbnail art or something like that, that they'll know what the game is about, and of course that they'll want to click on it. But you don't need me to tell you about all of that sort of thing. So there's only one more thing remaining, and that is a final pass. I'm not kidding when I say you really want to go through your game and just play it yourself, not necessarily have just a playtester play it, but you want to play it yourself and go through the entire game, or as much as you can in one sitting, or even multiple sittings, but you'll find a bunch of stuff that you just would not have found otherwise by just going through it yourself one final time, not looking for stuff to add, not looking for things that you could make better, but just looking for bugs and things that you can quickly make different and stuff like that. I know that helped me tremendously when I was going through it, because if the playtester isn't on the team, then they're not going to have the same vision that you have, and it's just really helpful to do that. So that will be my final advice on stuff that you can do to polish your game. As always, if you want to look at the files that I have been showing you, you can go to this link that I'm showing on screen and you can download Get Into Their Heart version 1.0. It's going to be the essentially release version for the game. But yeah, if there is a next time, I'll see you then.